Good evening, Sanibonani, goeienaand dames en heren, Tawela, bonjour madame monsieur, bonsoir. It's a real pleasure and a very special privilege to welcome you to this very special occasion this evening. I continue to puzzle over why we take the back seats instead of the front seats, but that's okay, as long as you feel comfortable where you are. So I begin by acknowledging the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Economic and Financial Sciences, Professor Amanda Dempsey. I also acknowledge Dr. Isaac Kanyama Kalonda, our respondent this evening, and of course our professor who is formally being inducted into the honored role of professor at this University of Johannesburg, Professor Lumengo Bonga-Bonga. We look forward indeed this evening to your lecture. Senior leaders of the university, members of Senate and other academics present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a great honor and a very special privilege, as I said at the outset, for me to welcome you to the Professorial inaugural lecture of Professor Bonga-Bonga. As I do so, I wish to express a warm welcome to his loved ones, his special guests, and of course his colleagues this evening. This is indeed a proud and, one hopes, a joyful, yet a landmark for all of you, for Professor Bonga-Bonga, and of course for all of us here at the University of Johannesburg and in higher education in South Africa, and of course well beyond South Africa's borders. Inaugurations, many a times pompous and decadent, but hopefully mostly dignified, well-meaning and unsullied, we're told, date back to ancient Greece. I need to do some homework on where it dates back in respect of ancient Africa. And so it dates back to ancient Greece as the opportunity for the formal investiture of a person into high office. And it marks the formal assumption of office or the position of authority. And so today is that day that marks the rites of passage and the entry of Professor Bonga-Bonga into the distinguished community of university's most senior scholars. It's indeed an office and a position of authority and of leadership, which I will speak about towards the end of my welcome remarks. And so it's indeed an office and a position of authority and leadership, which we shall not assume lightly, but do so with considerable and ongoing thought, reflection, deliberation, and hopefully presence of mind. I'm of course reminded that inaugurations usually follow well after the actual appointment of the, that is to the role or the post. And these are often a test and an indication as to whether the incumbent still finds the now somewhat older role or office as interesting as at the time of the interviews, as exciting as at the time of the interview. And as we know, in the case of Professor Bonga-Bonga, it's almost 12 months that has passed since his official assumption of duty as full professor. And so we shall therefore observe Professor Bonga-Bonga tonight with much more than an ordinary level of interest. I remarked a moment ago that the professorial inauguration is as important to the incumbent and their loved ones and colleagues as it is to the university. I say this since the inaugural lecture is as much a reflection on the state and the intent of the contemporary university and how it measures up, as in Professor Bonga-Bonga's inaugural lecture this evening on assessing the possibility of the further financial liberalisation within the Brics grouping, and also on whether the university as an institution is worthy of its position, whether it's worthy of pride and of admiration. And so the lecture this evening is as much an assessment of Professor Bonga-Bonga as much as it's an assessment of the state of this and of the broader university system domestically and globally. On these auspicious occasions, I often remark on and remind us of Vartan Gregorian's hopefulness and, dare I say, controversy, when he announced that universities are not only repositories of past human endeavor, they are instruments of civilization. You can see where the controversy sits, right? They provide tools for learning, for understanding and progress, he continues. They are the well springs of action, a source of self-renewal, of intellectual growth and of hope. They are mediums of progress, he continues, of autonomy, of enlightenment, of independence and self-determination. And yet at the same time remind us of Wernick's argument that the university has a contradictory relationship with the surrounding society. On the one side, the autonomy, in terms of its axial values of truth, of wisdom, of science, and so on. And on the other side, he continues, those who control the means of material production control the means of mental production. And the dominant ideas are the ideas of those who dominate. And I'm reminded of the reflections of Professor Immanuel Wallerstein, who spoke not so long ago at a humanities lecture series, as he considers his own journey. And I quote him, "It seems to me," he says, "that it is the duty of the scholar to be politically and intellectually subversive of received truths, but that the only way this subversion can be socially useful is if it reflects a serious attempt to engage with and understand the real world as best as we can." And so I'm also reminded that there are very few books available in decent bookstores, dare I say, on what it is to be a professor, and in particular, what the freedoms and duties of the most senior scholar of the university is. In this regard, I offer you the reflections of Bruce McFarlane, who in his book, Intellectual Leadership in Higher Education, Renewing the Role of the University Professor, seeks to correct this oversight. And he argues, I believe convincingly, that given the corporatization of the research agenda, professors must reclaim professorial leadership, and that they thus occupy a very special role. Specifically, he argues that two freedoms, that of critic and of advocate, are essential for professors to execute their four duties, which he outlines: those of mentor, of guardian of standards, of enabler of networking and mobilizer of resources for others, and as ambassador for the institution or the discipline. And so this evening we will have only one small insight into how Professor Bonga-Bonga responds to this call for the return of professorial leadership. And so let me now invite the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Manda Dempsey, to introduce to us Professor Bonga-Bonga.
Good evening to the VC, to Prof. Bonga-Bonga, to Dr. Isaac Kanyama Kalonda. I'm happy to present you the profile of Professor Lumengo Bonga-Bonga. Professor Lumengo Bonga-Bonga holds a doctoral degree in economics from the University of Johannesburg and a master's degree in economics from the University of Pretoria. He is currently the head of Department of Economics and Econometrics at the University of Johannesburg. Prof. Bonga-Bonga has published extensively in a number of international journals. His research profile is broad and rich. He remains an important contributor to research output for the Department of Economics and Econometrics, despite his demanding responsibility as head of the department. In 2009, he contributed the most research output for the Faculty of Economic and Financial Sciences. In fact, Professor Bonga-Bonga's work has not only increased the visibility of the University of Johannesburg, South Africa, and Africa on the global map of research, but has also contributed to solving some policy dilemmas faced by a number of institutions. Prof. Bonga-Bonga contributes significantly to training public servants and central bank researchers in Africa in the different fields of economics and econometrics. He currently serves as a reviewer for various international journals such as Economic Modelling, Development Review, South African Journal of Economics, the African Finance Journal, and the African Journal of Management and Economic Sciences. Prof. Bonga-Bonga transfers his passion for research to his vision for the direction the department is taking. The Department of Economics and Econometrics has increased its research output more than 3 times in less than 4 years. In addition, in less than 3 years, the department has twice scooped the prestigious Vice-Chancellor Prize for Most Awarding Researcher. I present Professor Bonga-Bonga.
So, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank my God, who has been the pillar and the source of provision for my life. Like I always say, there is nothing that I have that I did not receive from God. I would also like to thank my family, my wife Jolie, my daughter Trinity, and my son Blessing. You have been an inspiration for me. One thing I always say to my children is that they have to achieve more than myself, as the glory of the latter house should be greater than the former house. So this is actually a challenge for my children then. My special thanks go to Professor Rensberg, our Vice Chancellor, and Professor Dempsey, the Dean of the Faculty of Economic and Financial Sciences, for making this event possible. To my parents, my brothers, sisters, and in-laws, I would like to convey the word of thanks for your unceasing support. To all family friends who are here, we thank you for availing yourself to this important event in our family. So you are special to us. To all our colleagues, thank you very much. Like we always say, we are a family. And thank you for your availability. So actually the title of my presentation, as you have it on the board, is actually assessing the possibility of further financial liberalization within the Brics groupings. So actually, we're not talking about Brics when you want to build a house. But Brics then stand for Brazil. It's a grouping that is made of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So at a time when the number of summits and forums aim at strengthening political and economic links between Brics member countries escalates, there is still skepticism as to whether all Bric member countries will benefit from further economic links between them. This uncertainty arises mainly due to the difference in the size of the economies. For example, the difference between China and South Africa in terms of their gross domestic product and population size is quite remarkable. The World Bank 2012 annual reports estimated the Chinese population to be 1.3 billion and its gross domestic product as 7.5 trillion US dollar in 2011. For South Africa, the total population was estimated to be 50.5 million in 2011 and its GDP 408 billion for the same year. Such a notable difference leads a number of analysts to question the motive for South Africa's inclusion within the Brics grouping and the possible benefit the country can derive from its membership. The uncertainty pertaining to the possible benefit small countries such as South Africa could derive from the Brics membership is informed by the lack of consensus in the economic literature on the true benefits of financial globalization. There is a wide evidence of the failure of research based on cross-country growth econometrics to find expected positive effect of globalization or economic integration. The lack of consensus on the positive influence of globalization on cross-country economic growth exacerbates skepticism as to the positive influence economic integration between Brics member countries could have on their respective economies. With regard to the uncertainty about the benefits small countries can derive from the membership of the Brics grouping, many observers in South Africa still evoke the 2006 decision by the South African government to limit trade, especially textile import from China, in order to point to the reason that free trade or liberalization within the Brics context will not be beneficial for South Africa. A number of analysts remarked that the Memorandum of Understanding signed in 2006 between China and South Africa to limit the inflow of Chinese textile and clothing products to South Africa shows that South Africa is not yet ready to allow free trade with China. Moreover, those analysts referring to the information made available by the Southern African Labour Research Institute show that the number of jobs lost in the clothing, textile, and footwear industry amounted to a total of 76,000 between March 1986 and December 2004, mainly due to the cheap import from China. Although the Brics grouping has not yet formalized the nature of economic cooperation among its member countries, it is evident from the outcome of a number of summits and forums that political, trade, and financial links will constitute the backbone of the grouping. It is in this context that this study has been conducted in order to assess whether it would be beneficial for a small country like South Africa to engage in further financial liberalization or integration within the Brics context. In other words, we attempted to assess whether it is economically rational for South Africa to adopt a political decision for further financial liberalization with its Brics counterparts. It is unfortunate that approaches to financial integration or liberalization have often been driven as much by philosophy and political circumstances as by economic factors. The premise of our study is that if there are economic reasons that justify financial integration between Brics countries, any attempt at further capital market liberalization will lead to an increase in economic growth through the lower cost of capital that derive from risk sharing. Risk sharing between countries encourages cross-holding of foreign assets, which ensure domestic residents against country-specific shocks to their income. This logically allows for greater diversification of income risk, which in turn spurs economic growth through greater specialization. However, a number of analysts contend that financial integration can lead to large and persistent imbalances between countries, differ in the degree of their domestic financial development. It has been shown that such an imbalance is reflected in the balance of payment disequilibrium as a result of the distortion of foreign portfolio allocation, and that this imbalance occurs mostly if financial integration decision is a result of political decision without consideration of economic and financial rationales. Further financial liberalization between Brics countries entails the possibility of scrapping exchange control regulations in trade among them. It is important to note that all Brics countries apply exchange control regulations to limit the flow of capital. In South Africa, the legislation dates from 1961, mainly in order to protect foreign capital reserves, as the country was under international sanctions and trade boycotts. The South African government has opted for a gradual approach to the elimination of exchange control. Although exchange control regulation can be seen as an impediment to financial liberalization, it has shielded a number of emerging market economies from risks associated with international capital flow during global financial crises, such as the 2007 subprime financial crisis. Any attempt to remove such a protection needs to be carefully assessed. Although the measurement of financial integration is not straightforward, the financial literature often makes use of security market to assess the extent and magnitude of financial integration. And this indicates that financial integration is often synonymous with stock market integration. Given that effective stock market integration between different countries implies convergence of the price of risk between the stock market, financial integration between different countries should entail convergence of cross-transmission of risk or volatilities. Consequently, an indicator that is used to measure the extent and magnitude of stock market integration is the degree of volatility spillover between different stock markets. A number of analysts indicate that the extent and magnitude of volatility spillover or contamination of financial and real shocks increase with financial integration. This reality implies that effective financial integration between different countries should be characterized by the interdependence and cross-country transmission of shocks. Therefore, the study assessed the extent and degree of financial integration between Brics countries by assessing the extent of risk sharing, as well as the magnitude of conditional correlation of stock market returns. The study assessed that effective and beneficial financial integration between Brics member countries should be reflected in the interdependence or cross-country transmission of stock market volatility shocks, as well as high conditional correlation of the equity returns. It is intuitive to use risk sharing, which entails cross-transmission of volatility shocks between countries as a measure of beneficial financial integration or liberalization. In fact, one of the adverse effects of financial liberalization is the increased risk of capital flights from small economies to big economies, especially during period of financial crisis. This outflow of capital occurs because small countries are often victims of risk contagion. In the absence of risk sharing among the countries involved in financial liberalization or integration, the country that is the source of volatility transmission is said to become the main beneficiary and recipient of portfolio and direct investment inflow at the cost of countries that are simply recipient of volatility shocks. It is in this context that the US is seen as a safe haven with regard to global financial integration. That is, during the period of financial turmoil, investors prefer to withdraw funds from countries that are simply recipient of international volatility shocks or risk that emanate from the US and invest them in the US financial market. This phenomenon is attributed to the equilibrium outcome of financial integration across countries with heterogeneous domestic financial market. Analysts contend that differences in domestic financial system may dilute the benefit of financial integration that is expected through efficient allocation of risk sharing across countries. This reality suggests that if there is any possibility of differences in domestic financial market or systems indicated by the absence of capital market liberalization, any attempt to liberalize capital market should create losers and winners in terms of the decision and the direction of capital flows, especially portfolio capital flow or net holding or risky asset. In the context of financial globalization, the recipient of capital flows during the crisis period are countries that are able to transmit the risk without necessarily being receivers of risk or shock from other countries. Therefore, risk sharing that entails the cross-transmission of volatility shocks between Brics countries is an essential condition for mutual benefit that can be derived from further financial liberalization between Brics countries. Table 1 that we have there present the differences in selected socio-economic and financial indicators among the Brics countries. It is clear from Table 1 that China is the leading economy in the Brics grouping in terms of vital economic and financial indicators. With a total population of 1.3 billion, China has a huge prospect of consumer demand and labor force that will continue to contribute to high economic growth. China's GDP in 2011 was by far the largest of the Brics economies. South Africa, with a population of 50 billion, close to 27 times less than China's, is the smallest economy in the Brics grouping. The 2011 GDP of South Africa is close to 18 times less than that of China, 6 times less than Brazil's, and 4 times less than Russia's and India's. The indicator for Human Development Index, HDI, is not rosy for South Africa compared to other BRICS countries. While South Africa experienced an annual decline on the average HDI growth for the period 2000-2010, other BRICS countries saw an increase on the annual HDI indicator during the same period. China has made strides in improving the quality of life of its citizens, as the average annual growth of HDI bears testimony. Factors that have contributed to the increase of China's HDI include sustained income growth, eradication of poverty and hunger, and growing quality in education. Nonetheless, inequality continues to persist in China, and this impedes its HDI value. As for South Africa, the decline of life expectancy due to the prevalence of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, especially in the period between 2000 and 2005, has contributed to the decline of its HDI. As the smallest BRICS country, South Africa seems to lag behind in terms of socioeconomic indicators. But the reality is different for financial indicators. South Africa is second to China in terms of the 2012 Financial Development Index. The country is ranked 28 out of 62 leading financial systems and capital market in the world. For the World Economic Forum, financial development is defined as the factors that contribute to effective financial intermediation and market, as well as access to capital and financial services. These factors include institutional environment, business environment, financial stability, banking financial services, non-banking financial services, financial market, and financial access. Table 2 that we present there evaluate the ranking of BRICS countries in terms of the element that constitute the Financial Development Index. South Africa has the best ranking among BRICS countries in terms of institutional environment. Moreover, South Africa is the best performer among the 62 leading financial systems and markets in the world in institutional environmental indicators such as corporate governance, legal, and regulatory issues. This reality shows that the financial development differences among BRICS countries are not as pronounced as the socio-economic differences. For a number of analysts, this indicates that South Africa can benefit from possible financial liberalization with other BRICS countries. So this study makes use of an econometric model in order to test the hypothesis of risk sharing or cross-transmission of volatility shocks between BRICS countries. A multivariate model is used to this end, where the mean equation is represented by a VR-EGASH model. I'm not expecting you to follow these equations, but I just want to remind the audience that modern economics make intensive use of mathematical and statistical techniques to solve economic problems. So that is why the study wanted to solve a model that assesses the direction, or what we call the cross transmission of risk between BRICS countries to infer the level or the benefit that can be derived from possible financial liberalization. So the data that we use in the analysis are daily stock market returns computed as the first difference of the natural logarithm of the MISEX index for Russia, Johannesburg All-Share Index for South Africa, S&P Nifty Index for India, Bovespa Index for Brazil, and Shanghai Stock Exchange Index A-share and B-share for China. The daily stock market return are expressed in percentage changes and cover the period January 1998 to April 2013. The sample selection is divided into two periods. The period before the formal formation of the BRICS grouping, which covers the sample observation from January 1998 to April 2008, and the period after the official formation of the BRICS grouping from May 2008 to April 2013. It is important to note that an official diplomatic meeting between Brazil, Russia, India, and China was held in Russia on the 16th of May 2008 to announce the official formation of the BRIC groupings. South Africa officially joined the BRICS grouping in December 2010, at which point the S was added to the acronym of the grouping. The study finds an increasing conditional correlation between BRICS stock exchange market during the period post-2008 compared to the period before 2008. This indicates the increasing level of de facto financial integration between BRICS countries. For cross-transmission of volatility shocks, the study also finds evidence of improving risk sharing among BRICS countries, especially after 2008. Nonetheless, there are some concerns on the reported result, especially for South Africa and China. The first concern is that at a 5% level of significance, there is no evidence of risk contagion from South Africa to other BRICS countries. The second concern is that China seems to be shielded from volatility shocks from most of the BRICS economies, except from Russia. This finding indicates that BRICS countries should be cautious if they intend to liberalize the capital market further. This liberalization should be applied gradually. We support the view of a number of analysts that attention should be given first to trade liberalization, and that this should pave the way for further financial liberalization. Small BRICS countries such as South Africa should not even think about scrapping exchange control regulation for the moment in dealing with other BRICS countries. Otherwise, they may experience a huge outflow of capital during the crisis or turmoil period. Thank you very much.
Good evening. You know, sometimes it's hard to talk after a good speaker like Prof. Bonga, but I'm going to try. So I'm very happy and it's an honor for me to be allowed to speak as a respondent after Prof. Bonga's speech. And I'm happy also to see the VC and our dean, and also our colleagues, and families and friends. And congratulations to Prof. Bonga. So, you know, he was speaking about the bricks, not to build houses. I know we understand what the bricks now means. But to me, each time that this acronym comes to my mind, especially when I think of us economists and the skepticism that we have about the inclusion of South Africa in this group of emerging economies, I usually ask myself the question of whether there exists some lucky letters. You know, sometimes we need some people, we say, I have my lucky number. You may have yours, I may have mine. And my question is there any lucky letter in the alphabet? So each time the word Brics, that acronym comes to my mind, that's what I'm thinking about. If you have the same concern as me, I would like you to express it in this way, the following way. How did an S letter embark a country into representing a whole country, a whole continent, sorry, in the emerging economies grouping? Well, the answer is very simple. If we consider pluralization as the magic wand. In 2001, when Jim O'Neill coined the acronym Brics, we were lowercase s, please, at that time. He could hardly realize that by pluralizing the acronym Brics, that he used to refer to Brazil, Russia, India, and China, like Prof. Bonga just told us, he was creating, by the magic of pluralization, what the political organization formed by the BRIC countries in December 2010 we call Brics, this time with a capital S. Although Jim O'Neill himself dismissed the notion of South Africa joining the BRICS, but with small s, lowercase s. One of the concerns was rightfully the size of South Africa compared to China, for example, as Prof. Bonga just told us. Moreover, it's not surprising that the magnitude of our financial and socioeconomic statistics, as presented by Prof. Bonga, of course, tonight, will surely give reason to Jim O'Neill. Many of us economists may be wondering why Nigeria was not selected to join the BRIC, because of its population that's almost 3 times more than the South African population. And especially because also Nigeria is also an emerging economy. But the question is, my question is tonight, could the Bric N sound better than Bric S? So the acronym, that's the magic of the pluralization of the BRIC. Anyway, to me, this acronym, BRICS, is an excellent example of when globalization and political decision meet a consensus. Unfortunately, political consensus and economic consensus don't always agree, since political benefits and economic benefits may well disagree. This is the idea that Prof. Bonga is trying to convey to us tonight. In clear terms, he is addressing the question of whether South Africa should take further political steps to reinforce its financial integration with the BRICS grouping, and whether such a decision could be economically rational. This is very important because, in spite of South Africa's lagging behind the other members of the other member countries of the group in terms of socio-economic performance, the differences are not very much pronounced in terms of financial development. as he just told us. Prof. Bonga has outlined the utmost importance of to understand that countries need to share their respective risk and hold counterpart foreign assets for financial liberalization to take place. One premise of his talk tonight is that risk sharing among countries lead to increased economic growth as a result of low costs of capital, but with a caveat that financial liberalization can lead to large and persistent imbalances between countries if these countries differ in terms of the domestic financial development. To be beneficial to the involved countries within the Brics, with capital S, financial integration as measured by, through the cross-transmission of volatility, as you just explained, among the member countries should translate into interdependence of shock market volatility shocks and reflected in terms of high conditional correlation among the equity returns. He used data, daily stock market return from the 5 countries in the grouping and an appropriate econometric methodology. I'm happy he did not explain all that to us, because it could be give us some constipation in our mind. And use that methodology to assess the extent of a beneficial effect of financial integration within the Brics grouping. And he found evidence of increased level of financial integration, as well as the evidence of improved risk sharing among Brics countries, which is actually a good condition for integration to happen. However, further financial liberalization, especially in the case of South Africa, should be taken cautiously. Not only for South Africa, but also for the other members of the grouping. Trade liberalization is in contracts advocated prior to financial liberalization that should actually, as you said, be applied gradually. This being said, I think that further steps can be taken to fully uncover the benefits of financial integration between within the Brics grouping. And as a scholar who has devoted his research to the Brics grouping, Prof. Bonga could shed more light on the position of South Africa in the group by considering the following concerns for future research. The first question, the first concern, is to address what is the degree of actual financial integration and what can be considered as the optimal level of financial integration within the Brics grouping. So that would help when political decisions are taken to see what is going to be the direction of the potential benefits. And also, is the actual level of South African integration within the Brics optimal or suboptimal? This is important, I was saying, as it will help any political decision in terms of what its potential outcome may turn out to be in terms of the financial liberalization. Another concern would be to consider explaining the transmission mechanism from political decision to financial liberalization. And the question to address is whether political decision is sufficient to produce the desired level of financial liberalization. As we said, political benefits can differ from economic benefits. There is also a challenge for all of us researchers in economics to assess the impact of Brics membership in terms of the integration of South African economy with the rest of the world outside the Brics grouping and the rest of the world as a whole. This translates in the necessity to decompose the financial integration of South Africa with the rest of the world in what is due to its membership in the Brics and what can be explained by other factors. And finally, effort needs to be conjugated in the direction of assessing the impact of the Brics membership on poverty reduction and human development. This raised the question of the Brics membership with a human face. Because today we are talking, Prof. Bonga also talked about the Human Development Index. So it was, that's when the question raised to see a development with a human face, which will take care of people's needs. So if we can, us as the community of researchers, also think in terms of the integration of South Africa into the Brics grouping and see how this can have a human face. Thank you very much.
Well, there we have it. I looked around in the room to see how it goes down, and I saw focus and the determination to follow this professor. Let me begin though by expressing our sincere appreciation to Dr. Kanyama Kalonda. We sincerely appreciate the time that you set aside to offer an assessment and a commentary on Professor Bonga's lecture this evening. One of the things that I look at closely when I have the privilege to officiate at these important functions is to observe the professor and to comment in my own head about the professor and the doctoral student, because that is often the point of reference. How skilled is the professor, given that the professor's responsibility for supervising doctoral and master's students. And so I listened with great intent this evening, and I won't ask any questions, I promise you, Professor Bonga. But two things I think I need to remark on, and one of them is precisely on the matter of dialectics, which is really the art, the tool that professors use for exploring, for examining, for engaging with the material, with the topic, with the subject. And in order to do that, it's essential for professors to do the basics right. And the basics includes conceptualizing the research. It is followed by designing the research, and inevitably the design includes assumptions, it includes hypotheses, it includes modeling, it includes theory, in order for the research project that then must be undertaken to offer, dare I say, a decent level of validity, a decent level of robustness. And I want to really express appreciation. Of course, I can go on and talk about the actual study itself, because just as much as the design is important, it can all go wrong in the study itself. And of course, following the study, the professor is challenged to analyze the results, to, after having done so, to arrive at some conclusions, having made findings. And ideally, as has been shown by Dr. Kanyama Kalonda, it is the responsibility then of the scholar to be able to outline new directions of research that follows from this important piece of work. And I really want to express my appreciation to Professor Bonga for the manner in which he took his time to lay out for us all these elements of an excellent study. And so I leave that for you to make your own assessment of and arrive your own conclusion of. I offer a second set of remarks, as I suggested at the beginning. One of the important responsibilities of the highest scholar of the university, of the global university system, because Professor Bonga is not only accepted here at UJ, he is also admitted, quote unquote, into a global community of the world's most senior scholars and academics. And again, as I suggested at the beginning, one of the most important tasks of the professor is to be subversive of received truths. That is, intellectually subversive, not with any other material. To be intellectually subversive. And so the received truth, I'm sure you will have noticed, is that there is great benefit for South Africa with its entry, financial and economic benefits with its entry into the Brics nations. That's the political mantra. That is the political orthodoxy. That's the received truth. And that is the job of a professor, the most senior scholar, is to turn that received truth on its head. To do as he has done, conceptualize the research, design the research, undertake the research, examine and analyze the findings, and of course offer us wisdom in the manner that he has been able to do this evening. Of course, as I suggested, the professor is also an ambassador of his or her discipline and of his or her university. And I trust that again Professor Bonga-Bonga has demonstrated that he is indeed an artist, a scientist, a true scholar in his discipline, and that he is able to advocate and to advance the work of his discipline. And so on that note, I want to suggest that we should conclude by saying this has been an outstanding lecture, that there has been considerable work put into it, and therefore that indeed Professor Bonga-Bonga has demonstrated, at least in my view, that the university is indeed something worth admiring, that the university is indeed something that is truly worthwhile. And it is so because of outstanding scholars of the kind and the ilk of Professor Bonga-Bonga. And therefore we can conclude that indeed we have here inaugurated one of this university and one of Africa's finest scholars. And so congratulations again